Good afternoon, viewers. We are live again from Sakra World Hospital, Bangalore. Today is 1st July. It's seen nationally as Doctor's Day, and I have one of the distinguished cardiac interventional cardiologists, who is Dr. Shrikant Shetty. Welcome to this session, sir. He's also head of the department here. And before we go ahead and start the topic, and I introduce you that what we are going to talk about today, what is your message for this National Doctors Day?
It is very important, every day, lakhs of doctors, including cardiologists and all other specialists. Over the last 15 months or so, we've been dealing with this massive humanitarian crisis, and all of us have been at the forefront of this effort to deal with the COVID surge in our country as well as worldwide. And we also know that sadly, a lot of our colleagues in India and abroad have lost their lives in the process of doing their duty. They have caught the infection, and today we should remember them and acknowledge their sacrifice. And the best way to acknowledge their sacrifice is to take good care of ourselves and make sure that the third wave doesn't happen. Get yourself vaccinated so that the sacrifices of all those people does not go in vain. We need to know that all healthcare professionals, whether it is doctors or nurses, who fought this battle and who lost their lives in the process, if their sacrifices have to be acknowledged, the best way to do that is by taking good care of ourselves. So that's what we should do. So I cannot really say that this is a happy moment for us. This year has been bad. So hopefully with a combined effort, we will overcome this situation, and the coming months will be better.
Well, thank you so much, sir. So today, viewers, we are going to talk about all about heart attacks. So any questions, all the aspects, understanding of heart attacks, that's what doctor's going to talk here. So before we get into the questions, the COVID cases have come down, right? And everybody's talking about back to normal. What does it mean to you?
Yeah, fortunately, the COVID admissions have come down substantially now. Of course, you have seen the graphs. It's not like it's hit zero across India. Still about daily 45,000 new cases are being diagnosed. So we have established a new baseline. For us in the hospital at Sakra, it means that we are back to normal with respect to our work. We are no longer dealing with as much COVID as we did a few weeks ago. So we are primarily back to our regular work, managing cardiac patients, doing coronary interventions and valve procedures and pacemakers, etc., which has always been the need. Only because COVID became an impediment, a barrier for people to access healthcare, this non-COVID work had taken a backseat, and now we see that people are coming forward without much fear and approaching hospitals and taking the necessary treatment. This is very important because heart diseases do not go away. They are always there. Lifestyle disorders like diabetes, blood pressure, cholesterol, obesity, etc., they only get worse in situations like these, when you are not able to pay attention to exercise and diet, and people are working from home, so their weight goes up, blood pressure, cholesterol, sugar numbers are much worse. So it's very important to keep the focus firmly on these issues also, because once COVID is gone and on the other side of the epidemic, we don't want to be dealing with a epidemic of non-communicable diseases like heart attacks and strokes. So we are glad to be back to doing our regular work. So you also should focus firmly on your lifestyle and make sure that these issues are kept under control.
Right. So let's coming back to our topic, which is all about heart attacks. So I think to set the context right, should begin with what causes heart attack.
So these are fundamental. We have spoken about this so many times, but there's no harm in reinforcing these ideas, because I always feel that an educated, informed patient is a good patient, particularly for chronic diseases like coronary artery disease, hypertension, diabetes. If our patients have information, then they become good partners in our decision making. And likewise, in case of heart attacks, which are an emergency, you need to make quick decisions. So minute is muscle. Every minute that you delay in taking decisions, you lose more heart muscle. So keeping yourself aware of what a heart attack is and how it happens and how it needs to be treated is very important. So no harm in reinforcing these messages. So heart attack, we all know, happens when one of the coronary arteries gets blocked with a clot, and blood supply is cut off to the heart muscle, and the muscle starts getting damaged. So we know we have three coronary arteries, and they are on the surface of the heart. So two on the left side, one on the right side. They supply blood to the heart muscle, and as we age, cholesterol plaques build up in these arteries, and to begin with, they may not impede the flow of blood, and as the plaque becomes more and more severe, the lumen of the artery, that means the path for the flow of blood, becomes more narrow. So initially the way a person may experience discomfort only during physical exertion, but sometimes the plaque ruptures, that means it cracks up, and the inside of the plaque gets exposed to the flowing blood, which causes the blood to clot. And once that happens, the artery gets blocked. So you can visualize a water pipe getting choked with muck, and so no water flows. So likewise, blood starts flowing within the coronary artery, and that causes loss of blood supply to the heart muscle that is supplied by that artery, and this leads to muscle damage. This is what we call myocardial infarction, or in common man's language, this is called heart attack. So the longer the block stays, more muscle gets damaged.
Right. What are the risk factors of heart attack?
Now, I told you that cholesterol plaques happen in individuals, and this is a factor of time. So you would be surprised to know that plaques build up in the heart's arteries right from the time we are in our second decade. So they form initially as what we call fatty streaks. Fatty streaks start forming in the coronary arteries or any artery in the body, even in the first and second decade of life. And from there, it progresses over a period of time, 2 to 3 decades, to become a complex plaque that eventually causes a heart attack. Now, what decides the journey between a fatty streak to a complex plaque leading to a heart attack are what are called risk factors. So these risk factors, if they are present, they accelerate the journey. And so what are these risk factors? For example, diabetes, high blood pressure, high cholesterol, smoking, sedentary lifestyle, lack of exercise, stress, genetics, if there is a family history of heart disease. So all of these, they increase the progression of the fatty streak to a complex plaque and lead to heart attacks. So I must strongly emphasize the importance of diabetes, blood pressure, cholesterol, and smoking in this respect, because these are, and sedentary lifestyle, because these are what we call reversible or what the modifiable risk factors. Whereas age and genetics are not modifiable. You can't change your genes. If there is a family history of coronary artery disease, you can only pay more closer attention to your other risk factors and make sure you follow a healthy lifestyle. You cannot change your genetic makeup. And you should have a low threshold to get yourself checked if you have complaints that could be suggesting a heart disease. So whatever the modifiable risk factors are, we need to work on them because that's our responsibility. So in consultation with your doctor, you should manage your sugar, blood pressure, cholesterol very well, so that they do not contribute to remote heart attacks or strokes in the future.
What are its symptoms?
So when we call heart attack a great masquerade, that means you don't need to have the same kind of complaints in every individual. Though classically, one would think that heart attacks would be expected to cause some crushing central chest pain, or experienced as a band around the chest, or pressure on the chest radiating to the lower jaw, or to the inside of the left arm, or to both shoulders, or to the upper back or upper abdomen. This is classical, but this is not always the case. And patient may experience these symptoms along with breathlessness, sweating, giddiness, vomiting, loss of consciousness, etc. Unfortunately, sometimes the first manifestation of heart attack for a lot of people is what we call sudden cardiac arrest. That means they die suddenly out of hospital, and this is very, very sad and very dangerous because we know when somebody has an out of hospital cardiac arrest, the average survival probability is less than 20%. And in our country, it may be lower because most people are not aware of what to do when they witness a cardiac arrest. They don't even recognize it. So if somebody has an out of hospital cardiac arrest, there's a high mortality associated with it. Now, I was telling you that not all heart attacks manifest in a classical fashion because sometimes there is no chest pain. So the patient may only experience jaw pain and he may end up with a dentist thinking he's got a dental problem. Or he may have shoulder pain, and we have seen this happening that the patient is consulting an orthopedician for a shoulder issue, whereas it could be heart-related pain. Likewise, patient may be seeing a gastroenterologist because he or she may think it is a gallbladder issue or a gastritis or a acidity issue. So, and in elderly people and those who are diabetic, sometimes there are very, very subtle symptoms such as burning sensation in the chest, tiredness, uncontrolled sugar, just breathlessness. So these may not be picked up so easily as a heart attack symptom. So if there is somebody who's got a high probability of developing heart attacks, in the sense that the coronary risk factors are there, family history is there, and any one of these complaints, even if it doesn't look so classical, you need to go and get a ECG done so that early diagnosis is made. And there is also something called silent heart attacks. We see a lot of people during routine evaluations, like let us say a preoperative ECG is done and then you find some evidence of what is called a old heart attack. So how does this happen? Sometimes they may have missed even when they had proper heart attack complaints, or maybe their heart attack symptoms were subtle or non-existent. So those are called silent heart attacks. So this is also known, particularly in diabetics and elderly individuals. Heart attacks may not be so dramatic, so they may just miss it. So that's why we call heart attacks as a great masquerade, and it can be misdiagnosed as some other condition, and therefore there should be a high index of suspicion, and then you should get yourself checked, at least do a ECG when there is a complaint that could suggest a heart attack.
Right. Talking about the diagnosis now, how is it diagnosed?
So first part of the diagnosis is done by the patient himself or herself. And so when you have classical symptoms or symptoms which could otherwise be suggestive of a heart attack, so that is the first part of the diagnosis. Why am I emphasizing that? Even in very sophisticated setups, the biggest delay in treatment to a patient who has a heart attack is the time from the onset of the complaints to the time that the patient feels that there is a need to access the emergency. So if you can shorten that duration, then you can improve the outcomes of heart attacks substantially. So first thing is you should recognize that this is a heart attack, and then you should get to a place where a heart attack can be diagnosed and promptly treated, rather than go through multiple levels of assessment, like going to a clinic, then from thence you will send for a ECG to a diagnostic center, and then you take another appointment to show the ECG. So hours can be lost in this. So this is not good. So you should go to the emergency room, get an ECG done, and ECG can diagnose as to whether it's a heart attack or not. If the ECG changes are not very striking, then we do a blood test called cardiac troponin, high sensitive troponin. After the first couple of hours of chest pain, high sensitive troponin is very sensitive for any muscle damage, so it will pick up that there has been a heart attack. And the other thing that we do is to do an echocardiogram, but this is not essential to diagnose a heart attack. Heart attack gets diagnosed by the patient complaints, ECG, and the troponin. And if the ECG shows a frank heart attack, we are not going to wait for the troponin report to initiate the emergency treatment. The ECG showing the heart attack is good enough for us to proceed with the further treatment.
Right. Now, coming to the treatment, what are the treatment options available?
Part of the treatment you can start when you are at home itself. The simplest thing that you can do is to chew one chewable aspirin. 300 milligram, it's available. So when you do that, the aspirin gets absorbed from the oral cavity itself. Aspirin, we know, is a blood thinner. So when taken early, it can stop a heart attack process, but that doesn't mean you will chew the aspirin and sit at home. It's only a partial treatment and it doesn't work all the time, but it gives you some treatment before you get to the hospital. And though a lot of my patients ask questions about whether they can take clopidogrel and atorvastatin, etc., from a advice being circulated in WhatsApp about a heart attack kit and all that. Mind you, if your chest pain is not because of a heart attack, and let's say it's because of a esophageal tear or because of a gastric ulcer that is bleeding or a duodenal ulcer perforation, and you take aspirin and then you take clopidogrel on top of it, then the underlying condition gets aggravated, worsened substantially. Like then the person starts bleeding heavily. Or if it is a non-cardiac but a situation that demands urgent surgery, like let's say a duodenal ulcer perforation, and you have already taken aspirin and a good dose of clopidogrel along with that, then the surgeon will not be able to operate on you. So it is just sufficient to take aspirin, don't take anything else. And if you have persistent chest discomfort, you can keep one sublingual nitrate like sorbitrate. This will help relieve the pain to some extent. Again, I must caution you that these are not like treatments. These are all some kind of first aid. Do not take the sublingual nitrate like sorbitrate if you are feeling dizzy, because that indicates that your blood pressure is low. And if you take sorbitrate on top of that, then your BP may go down further. Once you get to the hospital and in the emergency they do a ECG and they diagnose that it's a heart attack, they will give additional blood thinner, tablets and injection and a high dose of cholesterol lowering medicine, and this will help opening up the artery before you get to the cath lab. So I explained how a heart attack happens. So the primary issue here is a clotting in the heart's artery, which means that the treatment has to be directed towards the clot. So all these preliminary tablets, aspirin, etc., other blood thinners, injections, they are the first line. And then to open up the clot, we have to either give a clot dissolving injection called thrombolytic, or we should do an urgent angiogram and an angioplasty. And in a facility which has got a cath lab, it makes more sense. There is good evidence to suggest that angioplasty with stenting, emergency angioplasty with stenting, works better than giving the thrombolytic drug, because the thrombolytic drug does not dissolve the clot sometime, and then so you end up wasting time, and then more muscle is lost. So you have a more controlled treatment option when you do an emergency angiogram and an angioplasty. Parallelly, because some of these patients with heart attacks may be having other issues, like because of the heart attack the blood pressure may have dropped, or because of the heart attack the heart pumping is poor and there could be water in the lung, oxygen levels are low, or there could be heart rhythm disturbances like slow heartbeat, fast heartbeat, etc. So parallelly treatment will be initiated for all of these issues, like sometimes temporary pacemaker insertion. Some patients with fast heartbeats, they may need what we call cardioversion, external shock, and oxygen, ventilation, etc. in people who have big heart attacks and are in a very serious condition. So these are all ancillary treatments which are equally important and life-saving, in addition to doing the angiogram and the angioplasty. Suppose a patient reaches a place where they cannot have an angiogram and angioplasty because the facility is not there. Then there are two things that can be done. One, if the hospital is quite close to a tertiary care center like ours, which has a cath lab, then the patient gets shifted after the preliminary treatment to the tertiary care hospital, where you will do the angiogram and angioplasty, provided the transportation time is short. If the patient is in a non-cath lab equipped hospital which is far away from any major tertiary care hospital, then what can be done is they give the lytic agent there. Now there are very convenient, relatively safe lytic agents available. They are given as a rapid bolus injection. So it can be given in the other hospital, outside hospital, and then the patient is shifted in an ambulance with good capabilities to the tertiary care hospital. And once the patient reaches the tertiary care hospital, there we straight away move the patient to the cath lab, irrespective of whether the pain and ECG are resolved or not, for an emergency angiogram. And these days we do the angiograms through the wrist artery, which carries a lower risk of bleeding. So even if the patient has received the thrombolytic drug outside, when we do the angiogram through the radial artery through the wrist, there is not significant increase in the risk of bleeding. So such a patient also gets taken into the cath lab. We do the angiogram, identify the blocked artery, what we call the culprit vessel. Why do we use this term culprit vessel? Like I mentioned earlier, there are 3 coronary arteries, and a patient with a heart attack may have blockages in more than one. But there will be one artery typically which would be causing the heart attack. So that is called the culprit vessel. So in that setting of the heart attack, we will do angioplasty and stenting to the culprit vessel alone. Even if there are blockages in the other artery, they are typically handled later, sometimes in the same hospitalization prior to discharge. At other times, we discharge the patient once he is stable and then bring him back after a few weeks and do the other vessels treatment, whether it is by angioplasty or bypass surgery. So this is in gist how then a heart attack is treated.
Right. Can the damage be reversed?
This is very important to know because I told you minute is muscle. So if you reach a hospital very early, that's why we call it the golden hour. So much of the heart muscle involved can be salvaged. So if you initially when you look at it, the echo might show that that area is not pumping well at all. That may be because it is not getting blood supply and it is stunned, not because that muscle is dead. So in this early phase, if you open up the artery and you achieve a good result, you will be able to salvage most of the muscle in that area. So in that sense, you are aborting the heart attack or reversing the heart attack process. However, if you get to the hospital later than 6 hours, substantial damage remains. So this is where the importance of understanding how a heart attack manifests itself, and you should know what to do when there is a heart attack. You should be aware of hospitals around you. So if somebody has in your family, then you should be able to respond to these situations quickly without asking around too much. You have to take quick decisions so that the treatment is promptly initiated.
Right. What we have seen recently is a lot of younger generation, the young individuals, they are getting cardiac arrest and heart attacks. What are the possible reasons?
Yes. So I will not say, what shall I say, they are not the majority of the heart attack patients. The heart attack even now is typically seen in patients who are older, but young heart attacks are not a rarity. So like I always say, it is never too early to start a healthy lifestyle. So even if you are in your 20s, 30s, you should not assume that heart diseases are a remote event, so they are unlikely to afflict you, particularly if you are a smoker. So if you are having a very stressful life and then you are following a bad diet, you don't need to have any of the classical risk factors like diabetes, blood pressure, or cholesterol to develop a heart attack, because cigarette smoke contains hundreds of toxins which get absorbed from the lungs capillaries, and if I have to make a comparison, the capillaries in the lung, if spread out, can cover a football field. So that's how efficient the absorption mechanism in the lung is. So when you smoke, it very efficiently delivers all these toxins into the blood that is circulating in the lung, and when all this gets into your circulation, it reaches the blood vessels everywhere in the body, including the heart. And once it gets there, it causes damage to the inner lining of the blood vessel and can cause what we call vasospasm, like imagine a tube that constricts, or the inside of the blood vessel clots suddenly. So one need not have pre-existing plaques to develop a heart attack if you are a smoker. So because of poor lifestyle, obesity, stress, night shifts, lack of adequate sleep, smoking, and doing other drugs like cocaine and marijuana, so a lot of young patients end up with heart attacks. So like alcoholic binge with a lot of smoking and then physical exertion along with that, typical settings for heart attacks. Unfortunately, we have also seen some people developing heart attacks during vigorous physical activity like sporting activities. So again, you need to become very consistent with your exercises and ramp up exercise intensity gradually Preferably, if you are doing high intensity exercises, you should do it under supervision. Make sure that you are well hydrated, and if you are going to exercise heavily the next morning, you should have slept well the previous night. Don't exercise in the morning if you have had consumed a lot of alcohol the previous evening because you are dehydrated. So these are all simple things, which you need to follow to avoid getting into trouble.
Well, my next question was just about exercises, but I think you have already answered it. So I'll move on to the next question, which is like, what are the lifestyle modifications you would advise to people that so that they don't really fall into this trap?
Yeah, I did mention along this conversation right from the beginning. So lifestyle is the key. All these diseases are called lifestyle disorders because most of them we bring it upon ourselves because we don't exercise. What's the kind of exercise that you need to do for as far as fitness of your heart is concerned? You just need to walk briskly 45 minutes to 1 hour every day. If you're younger or at any age, if it is possible for you and if you have done it before and if you can train yourself well, you can also run, jogging, and resistance activity like weight training is recommended at least 2 times a week because some degree of muscle building, strengthening the bones, flexibility of the joint, these things are also important because this will prevent falls and fractures, which are also big concerns in older individuals. You could do any kind of aerobic activity like cycling, stationary cycle, outdoor cycling, swimming, squash, badminton, whichever suits you. But you should do moderate intensity aerobic activity for at least 45 minutes to 1 hour, 5 days of the week. So this is good enough for maintaining your cardiovascular fitness. But if you're passionate about sport or about running, etc., you can do that, and there is really no incremental benefit in let's say like running a 10k or a 21k is not more healthy for your heart as compared to running, let us say, 5 kilometers. It's not as if somebody who runs 21 kilometers will live longer than somebody who runs 5 kilometers every day. But if you're passionate about it and if you're trained for that, you can continue to do it.
Right. Well, thank you so much for being here, sir. And I thank you all who could join us for this session today. And with this, we come to today's end of the session. Please join us soon for another informative live.
Thank you.